Hey guys, welcome to Redline Talk Show. I'm here today with the council member for the 50th district. His name is David Carr. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
So David, thank you for being here. Thank you for being part of the show. I wanted to get to know you a little bit.
Sure.
And also the people that don't know you. Tell us a little bit about your background and how you got started into the political service.
Sure. Well, it's my pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me. You know, I grew up in Staten Island, born and raised, and I always knew from when I was a young kid that I wanted to be involved in politics and government. As early as 10 years old, I started campaigning for, local officials who were seeking re-election. And I remember seeing Mayor Giuliani and other local leaders like Guy Molinari campaigning together in 1997. And I just the political bug bit me. It got to me early. And ever since then, I knew I wanted to be in public service.
So Dave, you have a lot of experience in the political field. You were the campaign manager for Joe Borelli and also Steve Mateo.
That's right. Yeah, so I got involved in Joe's campaign for the state assembly back in 2012. I was working for our local congressional office at that time. And, he needed a volunteer campaign manager. And, we just hit the ground running, and it was a wonderful campaign. And he got elected, and then he asked me to come and serve as his chief of staff, which I did for a year. And one of his first big endorsements as a new elected official was for Steve Mateo, who was running for city council at that time, the seat I now hold. And I got involved in that race. And then Steve asked me to be his chief of staff at the council. And that's where I was for 8 years, including the last 6 of which he was the minority leader of the council.
Very nice. So then you got elected in 2021. It's been, 3 years now?
Yeah, I just passed my 3-year anniversary in office. I took office November 30th of 2021. And it's been interesting. Fortunate that I had the experience working for Steve because I have the lay of the land. I know how the council works. And you have the right expectations that there's a lot of change you can do in this role, but it's incremental. It's little by little.
Yeah.
And a lot of times you're taking the baton from others who have worked on something and trying to move it forward.
So tell us a little bit about that specifically. What does a council member do on a day-to-day basis, and what type of work are you involved in?
So it can be different every day, and that's one of the reasons why I love it so much. Some days, it's a legislator's job, right? We're trying to pass bills, we're negotiating the budget, making sure that the agencies that we think mean the most to the quality of life of our residents get funded, like sanitation, the police, fire, and others, schools. And the other part of it is often it's sort of like being the ground game for a better quality of life ourselves, right? People call us, complain about potholes on their blocks, tree limbs that are leaning too close to their homes or power lines, a traffic situation that seems to be unresolvable. And you kind of get in the nitty-gritty and you bring these agencies together who can bring a solution and try to get them to do what's needed. And I think that's one of the parts of the job that I enjoy the most because we represent on average about 174,000 people in every council district.
Wow. Okay.
And that's bigger than most cities and towns in this country. So we're kind of like a mini mayor trying to direct agencies to address concerns that residents have in their neighborhoods.
Yeah. So what are some of your biggest challenges right now? Because I know, do you have to work with other I guess members from the other aisle as well? Is that a challenge for you, or?
No, we definitely have to. I mean, there's 51 members. 6 of us are Republicans, and we caucus in what's called the Common Sense Caucus with 3 Democrats who kind of share our worldview and principles. So that's 9 out of 51. So you definitely need to work with the majority conference. And I find there's a lot of ways that you can do that. There's an old saying Republican Mayor Fiorello LaGuardia had, right? There's no Republican or Democrat way to take out the trash. A lot of the nuts and bolts issues that we have are not partisan. And the news often covers the divergences ideologically between the Republican and Democrat members. But the truth is most of our docket is non-controversial. So there's a lot that you can do. And that's why it's important that even though you stand up for principles and you fight for your beliefs and what your constituents want, at the same time, you make sure you preserve your working relationships because you still need to get things done when you do find areas where you can agree.
So you're a Republican. right?
Yes.
Is it easier now that Trump won the presidency? Does that make your job easier?
I hope so. I think that we have a lot of focus on things that I think that the president will kind of bring to the fore of municipal politics when he takes office again in January. One of the ones that comes to mind is sanctuary cities, and we've been fighting as a caucus in the council to get the city to reconsider its position on what it does with individuals who are criminals, but are either here illegally or maybe are here seeking asylum, but it's sort of like the veneer of legality where it's not really a genuine asylum claim. And so we don't think these people should be shielded from the consequences of committing criminal acts. But there's local laws that ensure that that policy is in place. And the mayor has expressed a willingness to revisit that. The council majority has not. And so I'm hoping that the president really puts pressure on cities like New York and other places that are shielding criminals from the consequences of the law. This is totally different from those aliens who are here, immigrants who are here,
How do you make that determination, though? Like, who decides how they're here? If they're here, like you said, a criminal course or not?
So whether they encounter our local justice system or not, right? There are plenty of aliens who have come here illegally, right? But have otherwise broken no laws, right? They're otherwise law-abiding people. They want to send their kids to schools. They want to work for a living. They want to just provide for their families. And I think we're all sympathetic to that. But I think there are others who are here, who come here and they commit criminal acts. They turn out to be recidivists, and they go through the revolving door of our justice system only to commit criminal acts again. And I think that we have a really good solution in terms of our immigration system where these individuals can and should be handed over to ICE. And that's what we want to happen.
I do want to touch upon it too. You successfully challenged non-citizen voting in court.
Yes.
Which is a significant legal victory for your district. Can you explain to us about that a little bit?
Sure. So as I was coming into the council, the city was planning to give voting rights to any non-citizen who has work authorization. So that could be someone who's a green card holder.
Yeah.
It could be someone who's here on a non-immigrant worker visa. It could even be someone who's been ordered to remove from the country, but they're the subject of deferred action by ICE, and they're given an EAD, an employment authorization document. So that's about 800,000 plus people in the city who fit that requirement. They just have to be resident for 30 days. And many of us, myself included, felt that this violated the state constitution, which defines a voter as being a citizen. And so we took that issue to court. It was actually the first vote I made when I joined the body was against that bill, which is now passed into law. And then we took it to court and we were successful at trial. It was appealed by the city, and we were successful in the appellate division. They did narrow the grounds for our win at the trial level, but they agreed with us on the essential holding that voting rights are guaranteed to citizens and citizens only.
Yeah.
And the city is unfortunately appealing it again to the Court of Appeals, which is the state's highest court. But I'm very confident that we'll prevail at that level as well.
That's actually very good. That's a very good point. Let's talk a little bit about Staten Island. I'm a resident of Staten Island as well. So Staten Island has been growing a lot in the past, few years. And there's concerns about gentrification and whether local residents will be pushed out. Do you guys have any plan around that to ensure that the people, we're going to have the space for everyone?
Yeah, it's an important issue. When my parents bought their home in Staten Island in around 1984, 85, I think they bought their house for about like $140,000, $150,000, $100,000. That house today would go for $700,000 plus. So I think that there's a real affordability problem, and I think that we really need to look at making home ownership more affordable again. And there's programs that the city has which need to be expanded, particularly helping families with closing costs, because oftentimes you save enough to get that down payment on the mortgage, but then there's these costs at the end, and it makes it a little bit out of reach. So we'd like to do that. I mean, in an ideal world, I'd love to cut property taxes. That would be a huge benefit. Well, that would mean that the city budget is going to shrink and not grow. And that's not been the case except for 1 year, and that was in 2020 with the COVID budget, where the budget was actually smaller than years previously. So we need to find a way to slow the growth in the city budget in order to reduce the tax burden.
So property tax has increased, as you mentioned. Also, insurance costs has increased for a lot of the, property owners and business owners. Who regulates that? Because to me, it seems like everything is going up and up each year. It never goes down. Again, the tolls as well is another issue that we're going to touch upon as well.
Yeah, it's nothing ever gets cheaper. And I think that it's one of the reasons why controlling inflation is so important.
Yeah.
Because it's not a tax in the sense that it gets paid to government, but it hits people like it's an additional sales tax, right?
Yeah.
And that's the most regressive of all because it has no bearing on your ability to pay it. And I think that we really need to do more to open up trade with other parts of the world, because what happened is the supply chain was really disrupted during COVID. And even though it's back to being where it was before the pandemic, people think that they can get away with these higher prices. And so I think that really what we need to do is also control spending at the federal level, because our deficits fuel inflation.
Yeah.
And that's why I'm hopeful that with the change of administration in Washington, that we can get a handle on inflation and bring prices back down.
So Staten Island has been, long criticized for its limited transportation options, especially when you compare to other boroughs. How do you plan to improve public transit on the island? And what are your thoughts around that?
So we're still not at peak ridership from pre-pandemic levels, which is interesting because I think it means more people are either working remotely or maybe have a staggered schedule than they used to. And I think we really need to look at expanding local transit lines. Oftentimes in the past, understandably, we focused on increasing express bus service to Manhattan. So I think we need to kind of help make transit ridership more accessible if you're just looking to stay within the borough. We were actually supposed to have a redesign of our local bus routes with the MTA, because we did one with the express bus routes pre-pandemic. And I think we really need to look at how we do that and where we're serving, because a lot of things have changed since the last time there was a holistic look at our local transit network.
And the prices did go up too as well for express buses as well. Again, I don't mean to say the same thing, but I feel like the cost of living has constantly increased, especially even in Staten Island, because was one of the most affordable boroughs than the rest. But now even Staten Island is becoming very more expensive. Any idea how do we, I guess, lower the cost for transportation for people who have to travel to work from Staten Island?
Well, I think the MTA needs to be better stewards of their own money. Every few years, they come to us saying they need more. And they've been horrible stewards of their capital plan. I mean, that's the whole reason behind the congestion pricing push, is because they focus so much on sort of vanity projects like the 2nd Avenue subway line that Governor Cuomo had to finish because he wanted to be the guy that actually finally did it, instead of focusing on basics like making sure the signal timing on the subway system was updated. So I think we needed to invest in our existing infrastructure rather than looking to expand. And I think if you had a more reliable service, and by the way, if you had a safer service, right, people don't feel safe in the city on the subways anymore. You'd have more ridership, and therefore you'd have more people paying fares and contributing to the cost share that the MTA has. But I think there are ways that the legislature and even the council can look at further subsidizing the MTA through their own budgeting processes, rather than going again to the transit users and the toll payers and saying, you got to pay more, even though they've been paying more over and over again for the last 2 decades.
But where is the accountability, though, on the MTA part? I mean, who controls how they're spending that money? And because I feel like it just goes to a black hole and nobody knows why they're always bankrupt.
You're 100% correct. There is a board that in theory is supposed to hold the MTA management accountable. But
the board is from where?
The board is appointed by various office holders,
okay,
and the controlling interest comes from the governor. That's why when Governor Hochul a few months ago said, I don't control the MTA, and I think even Governor Cuomo tried that line at one point in time, it's a farce. Everyone knows whoever the governor is, they control the MTA. And ultimately, the buck has to stop with them because they're the ones who control the board and therefore can hold the MTA management accountable. And they've just been unwilling to do that because for them, it's an agency that is responsible to them, and they're ultimately, on the line for anything that the MTA has done incorrectly in the past. So for them they want all the power without all the responsibility.
Right.
And that's the unfortunate thing here, is that the governor, who's supposed to be holding them accountable, has not.
But they're also asking the city for money as well. So we have to subsidize them as well. This is what I don't understand. So they have their own budget, right?
Yep.
They're asking the city for money, and then there's no accountability on their part.
No, you're right.
And then we're stuck with the bill.
Yeah, the taxpayers are funding them 3 times over, right? Through tolls and fares, through the state budget, and then through the city budget.
Yeah.
And so, the question is, what's the best vehicle for that? I'd rather see subsidies coming from the city and state budget because it spreads out the cost the most. When you ask the toll payers and the fare payers to do it, that's hitting their wallets very powerfully. And so I don't want to go dipping into the pockets of these transit riders again and bridge drivers again. But the reality is that we will have to come up with additional ways to support the MTA. And then the other one we haven't talked about today is actually fare enforcement. You know, the MTA leaves $500 million a year on the table through fare evasion.
What does that mean?
So there's people who are jumping the turnstiles, not dipping their Metro card or their Omni card when they get on the buses, and they're basically getting a free ride. And the truth is that comes up to about $500 million a year.
Wow.
And the congestion pricing plan is supposed to finance $1 billion, right? So you're already halfway there if you just start going after the fare beaters. And there's been this movement that, these people are victims of economic circumstance. In some cases, that's true, and you could help those people through expanding benefit programs, through Omni and other ways. But that doesn't mean you don't try to stop people from jumping turnstiles or not paying when they get on the buses. You really need to make sure that people are paying for the service that they're using.
So that when you say that, so that's part of also the MTA police, right? That have to kind of control that, those criminals.
Yeah, the MTA police, but the NYPD has their role in that too, particularly in the subway system. I think there's a lot of ways that the MTA can look at their rider data and see where some of the worst cases are of fare evasion, and you focus there. It's very much based on CompStat, right? In the 90s, when that was first created, it's a database of where crimes are taking place, and you focus your resources in those places. And they could do the same with MTA buses and stations for the subway.
I do want to talk a little bit about Verrazano Bridge. Correct me if I'm wrong, but wasn't that bridge supposed to be free to Staten Island residents after it got paid off, which was a long time ago?
So that I've heard that story many times.
Yeah.
I asked Guy Molinari, who's a former bar president, congressman, assemblyman, about that once, and he told me that it was probably an informal promise made at some point in time.
Okay.
And
by
never.
who?
Yeah. Well, he wasn't. Yeah, he wasn't even that sure himself. And that's why it ended up being repeated and repeated and repeated.
Yeah.
The truth is, every time the bridge gets renovated, the project is financed through bonding, and so the bonds need to be paid off. So whenever that happens, it sort of justifies legally imposing the toll on the bridge, because the toll bonding payments are structured that bridge maintenance and operations gets whatever it needs every year. Then after that, a certain share goes to New York City Transit, which runs our subways, our buses, the Staten Island Railroad. And then the rest of it goes to the MTA General Fund and subsidizes things like Long Island Railroad, Metro North. Okay. So it's the bonding is what allows the the profit sharing, if you will, to occur based on the Verrazano Bridge toll. So every time they refinance the bridge, they justify the tolling. And so that's why legally they're able to continue doing what they're doing. Plus they have a general authority to set tolling on their crossings.
I mean, I get that, but do you believe the current toll structure is fair, though? What is your stance on that? And then do you have any proposals around that as a member? So,
no, I don't think it's fair that these outer borough crossings, in particular the Verrazano Bridge, finance the rest of the system.
Right.
That's not how things are supposed to be. It's supposed to be, ironically, tolling people for the places that people want to go en masse, right? Nobody's coming en masse to Staten Island. Nobody's coming en masse to the Rockaways by car. Nobody's coming en masse across the Whitestone or Throgs Neck bridges. So they're basically they've become dependent upon this system where drivers pay for the transit system. And, ironically, if the outer borough crossings were free and then they wanted to impose entry costs on what they call the central Manhattan business district, like they're trying to do with congestion pricing, I think that would seem more equitable, right? That you're charging to enter Manhattan rather than charging people this exorbitant toll to cross these outer borough crossings. I do think that the Staten Island resident discount on the Verrazano does take a lot of the bite out of the toll. And that's a credit to Senator Andrew Lanza and former Assemblyman Mike Cusick, who got the existing discount rate set in law and gets budgeted every year, and to the Albany delegation today for preserving it. But there's still this issue of the MTA is dependent on outer borough drivers not even coming to Manhattan to finance transit to Manhattan. And that's just unsustainable, as we've seen.
So you brought millions of dollars back to your district for schools, parks, and cultural institutions. How do you prioritize where the funding goes?
So it's a 6-month process for city budgeting, right? We start in January. A lot of different groups apply. We've heard throughout the year prior to that about different needs from schools and parks and neighborhood associations. And then we embark on more listening, right? From January to June, I take a lot of meetings. My team takes a lot of meetings. Different groups weigh in, community boards, et cetera, to kind of tell us what the needs are. And like I said, you kind of get a handle on that from just doing the job day to day of all the different things that are kind of on the docket. Well, we were able to get this funded last year. Now this priority is on deck. And so that's generally how the process works. You just kind of have to be in the weeds all the time to really understand where the needs are.
So I do want to talk a little bit about you and the Albanian community.
Sure.
I've been very involved with that. Especially, I was also at that event that we did with Ismail Chamali Way on Staten Island. How does your relationship with the Albanian community? Because I know that you're very involved with us.
Yeah, so it's been my real pleasure to get to know everyone in the community over the last 3+ years. It started in particular with the Ismail Chamali Way. Nasser Nika came to me with this idea of naming a street for an Albanian national hero, particularly because of the concentration of Albanian Americans in the East Shore of Staten Island. And so we embarked on that. We were successful. And I think it was a great kind of reintroduction to the community. And ever since then, I've just gotten to know all the different chachatas, the groups that, kind of preserve the connections to towns of origin, back in either Montenegro or Macedonia, Kosovo, Albania itself. And it's just people become friends, right? Yeah. And it's just been a great process getting to know the community, its culture, its traditions, and then, of course, the wonderful people that make it up.
And you also told me a little bit that you traveled over there as well. How was that experience?
It was wonderful. I grew up as a young kid in the 90s, and so the conflict in Kosovo was formative for me. But I had never been there before. And so going there and hearing the stories of the veterans and the survivors and how proud everyone is of what they built and with our help. Yeah. And how important that support is moving forward, especially given the uncertainties of today. This really kind of drove home to me the close relationship we have with the region. And then Montenegro was just beautiful. So many Staten Islanders that I've gotten to know are from Olcin or Kraja or Animalit, and other places. And so it just beautiful, beautiful landscape. And I understand why everybody wants to go back every summer because it's just a phenomenal place.
You haven't visited Albania yet, though, right?
No, we traveled through Albania, going from different places, but we didn't get to make a stop. So maybe next time.
You definitely have to visit Albania. It's much more beautiful, actually.
Okay.
But I do want to bring it back a little bit to the current state, political affairs. So you are a Republican.
Yes.
So you represent the minority party in a largely democratic environment. What do you see the biggest challenge with that?
So I think the biggest challenge is that when you have a new generation of council members like we had 3 years ago, I think all but 10 or 11 of the body was new, that you kind of have to just kind of get across that there's a lot that you can still work on together. I think there's an instinct to kind of see each other as adversaries, and on a lot of issues we will be. Because it's important that we kind of give voice to our principles and our positions. But the important thing is to kind of let everyone know on both sides of the aisle that you're there to get stuff done. And that's really what municipal government is all about. We are the least ideological level of government, and so there's a lot of opportunities for constructive partnerships.
And any special projects that you're working on that you want to tell us about?
So one that I've been working on since before I took office was the start of a gifted and talented K-8 school on Staten Island. We've had gifted and talented programming at certain schools before in the public school system, and what this is basically it's a program where you previously entered by taking a test. The details have to be worked out moving forward, but accelerated programming for public school students. It was really one of the gems of the public school system in New York City. Bill de Blasio dismantled it during his administration, and this mayor is looking to bring it back. And we got a commitment from him and his then chancellor, David Banks, to have a K-8 G&T school at the former St. John Villa campus. And that was something we announced earlier this year. It would probably open either in 2029 or 2030, but we have to get the details of the new G&T program right, in particular how admissions are going to be done. And so that's kind of my focus now, is having the commitment for the school, is getting the program reactivated the next 2 to 3 years, so that we can have a program that's up and running in time for the school to be opening its doors.
So as you look ahead for the future, what are some of your top priorities for the remaining years of your current term?
So we have one more year in the current term, and then I have the ability to run for another 4-year term next year. I think really what we're looking to do is we're looking to kind of stop congestion pricing.
Okay.
We have a lawsuit with some of my colleagues, led by the borough president and the United Federation of Teachers, to stop it. We should have a court date later this month. Hopefully, the judge will rule in our favor, because I think the governor was looking for a January 5th or so start to congestion pricing. So that's a major...
Let me stop a little bit right there.
Yeah.
For those that don't know what that means, the congestion pricing, what actually is it?
So the MTA and the governor are looking to institute a charge for entering what they call the Central Manhattan Business District, which is basically, roughly speaking, from around Midtown and south.
Okay.
And this is in addition to any tolling you'd pay by crossing either an MTA bridge or a Port Authority crossing. And originally it was set for $13.
Wow.
And they announced a modified. Well, actually, first the governor paused it in the spring. It was very blatantly to avoid any political consequences in the 2024 election. And then when the election was over, she announced the unpausing, but it's now going to be a $9 fee instead of $13. And this is all in a pursuit of generating $1 billion a year in additional revenue, so that they can get $15 billion in bonding.
Wow.
For the MTA capital plan. And so what we have been arguing is that they did not do the environmental due diligence required. They needed to do a full environmental impact statement, not just an assessment, which is a less in-depth analysis. And even their own less in-depth analysis showed significant environmental impacts to outer borough neighborhoods and environmental justice communities. They're just moving the pollution and the traffic and the congestion to different areas. They're not actually reducing it. And they're also profiting from it. They're going to profit from congestion. And congestion pricing, in the truest sense, is actually supposed to change driver behavior to have more people, take transit options. That's not what's happening here. So we're really trying to fight that.
But who came up with it? I still don't understand, who came up with this congestion pricing? It came out of, did MTA come up with it, or did the government come up with it?
It's been around in concept for a long time.
Okay.
The first major city that I know of that tried to institute it was London. And it's really been not successful there. And around 2008, 2009, Mayor Bloomberg tried proposing a congestion pricing plan to subsidize public transit through the MTA. It was not implemented. And so it's been around, but this iteration really comes from the MTA of today and the governor. And I should say Governor Cuomo's administration is the one that started it, but she's carried it forward, Governor Hochul. So it's really this brain trust that has brought us the plan that we're trying to fight today.
I mean, that's amazing. We have people like you who are trying to fight that. From your point of view, how do people, I guess, get on board with that and help you get that message across?
So I think at this stage, we have a number of different stakeholders, elected officials, both parties, labor organizations like the UFT who don't normally partner with a number of Republican
Yeah.
elected officials on these kinds of initiatives. I've even done rallies with Democratic Party district leaders in Manhattan who are against this also. So it's really a broad coalition of people who are opposing it, and that's the coalition that's put together all these different lawsuits. I think there's like 4 pending right now. So hopefully, if we're successful in court, we can delay this enough that when President Trump comes in, he can revoke the U.S. DOT authorization.
Oh, he can do that?
With the Biden administration had given, and that's something that he's indicated he's willing to do. And in particular, he can focus on the crossings with New Jersey, because if that is not permitted to be a part of the program, they can't get the bonding that they need, and therefore the whole plan becomes mooted.
So, I mean, I personally have seen a lot of people that had left New York City because of the high cost of living here. Do you see that as a problem?
Oh, sure. I mean, we lead the country in out-migration as a state.
Yeah.
And a lot of that is coming from the city. It's also coming from parts of upstate as well in Long Island. But it's a huge concern. And it just goes to show that you can't continue on the path that we're going. You need people to feel safe, right?
Yeah.
You need to make sure that people can go to work, can go to school, can just run their errands and have their daily lives feeling comfortable in their own city. But also, it means that you have to control the costs of government, because the continual demands for tax and fare and toll and other fee increases on top of high inflation generated by what's going on in Washington with high spending is going to drive people to low-cost areas.
Yeah.
And so we have to change our behavior, because otherwise, we're just going to keep seeing people leave to go elsewhere.
That's very true. So you said you're going to run again. Are you going to run again in the city council, or you're looking to get further up the food chain?
Yeah. So my plan is to seek re-election next year.
Okay.
Like I was saying earlier, my term limits don't clock in until 2029. So that would be my 8th and final year in office, or this office. And then at that point, I would start to, as we approach that, I would start to see if there's other opportunities, public or private sector. But like I said in the beginning of the program, my interest in this goes back to when I was a little kid, and it's still as much of a passion for me today as it was back then. So I'd like to continue to serve if I can.
So for young people who are aspiring public service to become a public servant, any advice you can offer them?
Just get involved early.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people feel like there's a high bar for access to getting into politics and government.
Yeah.
And there's not. You just have to walk into a headquarters, walk into an office and ask to intern. People like me are always looking for young people to get involved. I'm still under 40, so sometimes I'm never sure if I'm still a young person or not technically, but like there's always people who are looking for new blood in politics and government, and we need it more than ever. So literally by walking in the door, you could be putting yourself on course to either be an elected official, be a chief of staff, be a senior policymaker, a campaign manager, a consultant, right? There's a plethora of roles that you can have and be fulfilled in politics based on, your needs and your personality.
So David, you mentioned a project called City of Yes. Can you walk us through that? What is exactly?
Sure. So over the last couple of years, the mayor and his administration have been pushing 3 changes to local zoning. Local zoning is the resolution that governs what you can build and where in the city.
Okay.
Is it residential, commercial, manufacturing? How high, how big, what kinds of uses? And we went through 2 of them last year. One was called carbon neutrality, which was about trying to create energy efficiency and environmental initiatives. The second was the zoning for economic opportunity, which dealt with sort of more commercial and manufacturing zoning. And the last one, the zoning for housing opportunity, just passed the council on Thursday. And it's in my view, a radical plan that is going to change the fabric of many neighborhoods in the city, particularly in the outer boroughs. And there's this notion that, low density communities like the ones I represent are somehow responsible for high rents and high costs in other parts of the city because we have not, quote unquote, done our fair share of housing starts. And I just think that that is not the case. Manhattan, parts of Brooklyn, other places are unaffordable because there's high demand for those particular areas.
Yeah.
The fact that that there's no like tall buildings in Staten Island doesn't mean that is not the reason why there's high rents in Manhattan. So I think that they're trying to change the way neighborhoods and outer boroughs look without the consent of those neighborhoods. So many community boards
are you saying
opposed
they're
it.
they're trying to do the similar, I guess, style of building in Staten Island?
So they're looking to do upzonings.
Okay.
But they're not looking to build skyscrapers in Staten Island, but they are looking to turn 1 and 2 family home communities into buildings with low rise residential buildings, probably 3 stories, 6 units in a building.
So they want to change the zoning.
Yes, that's exactly what they're doing. And they're doing so in a way that is without regard to local context. They did not do the environmental due diligence. Again, that seems to become a habit in government where people do environmental reviews that are just meant to kind of justify what they want to do anyway. And so we didn't win the fight legislatively. It passed 31-20, which is actually close by council standards. But many of us are now looking at ways that we could litigate this because, again, the environmental review is not done. And they're claiming that this plan at most would only have created 110,000 units of housing citywide. We believe that's just kind of scraping the top of the iceberg of what they're looking to do. And so, when you change about a third of Staten Island, let's say, from 1 and 2 family home zoning to something, again, where you have this low rise residential buildings, that's going to have a dramatic effect over the next 10 years. And that's not why people chose to come here.
Right.
We're a city of 1,000 neighborhoods. Everybody has a different style of neighborhood that they can find for themselves. And Staten Islanders moved to Staten Island and parts of Southwest Brooklyn. People are residents there because they wanted a more quiet residential neighborhood, not like the rest of the city.
Yeah. I mean, and Staten Island has grown a lot. I think the current population is about 600,000, if I'm not mistaken.
About 500,000 now. Yeah.
500,000. Yeah. And if you do this City of Yes project that you were mentioning, then that's probably going to increase the population as well. It's going to be more congested.
Without a doubt. There's things called accessory dwelling units or ADUs where 1 and 2 family homes can now build an additional living unit in their home. In some cases, you could have a significant growth in resources. And the administration brought no capital dollars to the table until the very end, only because the Speaker of the Council, Adrienne Adams, insisted that there be investments. So it's to her credit that she brought this to the table. But it's never really going to materialize in my view because it's unbudgeted, it's unappropriated, and it's probably not worth the paper the promise is printed on. And in my view, we need to be talking about infrastructure up front to anticipate growth rather than chasing growth like we've always done. That's why our infrastructure, even today, isn't satisfactory for the development levels that we've had.
But do we even have the infrastructure to support that type of? Because even now, I think Staten Island is very congested when it comes to the traffic-wise. We only have one major highway.
That's really part of the problem is that because the city doesn't control its transit system, the MTA does. It's an independent state agency. They can never intertwine transit development with their zoning changes.
Yeah.
And then the same is true, with DEP and sewer water infrastructure, in the sense that, they're playing catch up now on the development from the 90s and 2000s, let alone what they're forecasting for the future. So even though DEP has done a lot to help Staten Island in recent years, there's still a lot more to do with the development rates that we have. So I just don't think that this was done contextually. It wasn't done with respect to local infrastructure needs, and the environmental due diligence was certainly not done here.
Well, David, it was a pleasure to have you. I think we covered a lot of topics, a lot of good information out there. Any other specific projects that you want to tell us about, or what's your future goals in the next term?
So I think that moving forward, we want to, again, finish the process with the gifted and talented school. I really want to invest in our small business corridors. Small businesses are the cornerstone of our communities. So many of them are givers to our local not-for-profits, as well as employers for local residents. And so I think we have to do more to build up those corridors, invest in them, make them walkable communities again, because it's so hard to compete with big box today, especially with Amazon and a lot of these logistics
Yeah.
companies. So that's really something that I want to do, is places like New Dorp, 13th Avenue in Brooklyn, Victory Boulevard in Westerly, and Richmond Road and Dungan Hills. We need to make sure that these businesses have places they can thrive in, and that people in the neighborhoods want to go and take a walk and patronize local establishments.
Very nice. Well, thank you for being here. It was a pleasure having you on the show, and
Likewise.
then hopeful to see you in the future with some big projects.
Yes, for sure. Same here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.